Hi guys, Mike here. In this episode, we are getting started by setting up a Git repository in our project for the series. We will start by installing all the software necessary, create a project repository in Azure DevOps, and set up everything to get started. So let's go. So first, let's have a look at Unreal Engine, what versions we need, and maybe something what we need later down the road when we get into characters and stuff. So what we need is Unreal Engine 5, of course. It's in early access too right now. That's the latest version here. And then we also need the latest Unreal Engine 4 version, which is 4.27.2 right now. This we will need because we will create like resource projects for characters, for example, that we can then import like these Paragon characters here, where we then can configure them, or rather set up a specific folder structure and then migrate them over to our real series project. And one thing, and maybe this could be like a tip of the day or something if you didn't know this, if you click on that drop down here and click on options, there are some things that you can reduce the amount of storage for the Unreal Engine install. For example, I think Android comes and iOS comes automatically installed as target platforms. And you can see like it's 6.92 gigabytes. So we don't need mobile platforms. So I turned off Android and all these things, even Linux and tvOS. So my only size right now is 21 gigabytes, and that's probably half of what you would get with a normal install. This just as a tip, and the same thing for the Unreal Engine 5, same stuff. So no Android, there's even some other things. So we don't need that, so you can turn this off and reduce size on your disk for that, for the install. And like I said, that down the road when we get into characters and our first enemies, we will need like the sci-fi characters from the Paragon series. So like Lieutenant Bellica or Murdoch or Twin Blast. These we will import into our project, the same with the minions and probably also the Infinity Blade minions. And then there are some other stuff in the marketplace that we need or that we can use for our purposes. So, but that's it for the Unreal Engine side. Let's have a look at Visual Studio, what prerequisites we need. Okay, Visual Studio. I installed version 2019. There's a new version out there, I think 2021, but I haven't installed that yet, and it's still brand new, and 2019 works perfect. So for using Visual Studio or using Writer and OWS later on, there are some prerequisites that we need to install, and this is where we need to use Visual Studio anyway. We won't use the IDE, but we use everything that comes installed with it. So what we need, for example, for OWS, it's the ASP.NET stuff that some parts of it the OWS uses when we start the instance launcher and stuff. Then what I also have installed is the desktop development with C++, and I have .NET desktop development and Universal Windows Platform development. This might all be too much, but I have never had any problems with missing redistributable or SDKs or other prerequisite versions and optional libraries that probably will be missing or might be problematic. But this, like I said, might be too much, but I'm more pragmatic, and I just install that stuff and get it installed without any problems. And the same with game development with C++. So these are the ones that I have installed and checked. So game development with C++, Universal Windows Platform, .NET Desktop, desktop development with C++, and the ASP.NET web development. If you install Visual Studio 2019 with all these prerequisites, then installing Writer and using it and using OWS later on will work. So this is it for Visual Studio. And the next step is optional. It's Rider for Unreal Engine. It's what I think the best IDE for you developing C++ in Unreal. It's still in preview, probably I think until March 22. At least that's how long my license lasts. I'm planning to buy this, so this is a paid software. Like Rider for Unreal will be integrated into the normal Rider from JetBrains IDE. So with this, you can also develop C# and stuff. So they will integrate it. And I think the last email that I received is this was the last preview version, and the next we would need to install a beta version of the newest Rider. And Rider will cost, I think, $15 or something a month, and then you can get like once you paid for 12 months, you get like a perpetual license or something. Like I said, this is optional, but it's so essential. I mean, you can use vanilla Visual Studio, but it's really like working in the Stone Ages compared to using Rider. But during development, of course, for you guys that don't use Rider, that want to use Visual Studio, I will make sure that you can see every include that I have for every header, and so that you can easily understand what's going on and know which headers to use and stuff. Because in Rider, it automatically includes the header files for the classes and components and everything that we use. If you use vanilla Visual Studio, then you need to go into the documentation and find out the header file that you will need for the certain component, for the certain classes and stuff and so on. So I don't know them all by heart. After working a lot with Unreal Engine, I know some of them by heart, but it's just so much easier. And Rider has a lot more features. It's knowledgeable about blueprints and many other things. And if you've seen my previous videos on the other series like the Endless Runner and the Blueprints to C++, you've seen me using Rider, and it's so much better. But in the end, it will cost money, and so you can choose what you want. Rider is still in early preview, so you can test it out still, I think, till March next year. So just wanted to say, go ahead, register, download it, install it, and then it should work from the get-go with all the prerequisites that we installed with Visual Studio. And so next up is Git. We need to install Git for Windows, the Git large file storage system, and a tool to work with our Git repository. Probably many of you don't want to use the command console. You can do everything with Git on the command console, but for some, this might be easier to have a visual tool. So first, let's get started by downloading gitforwindows.org. This is the same version like the standard Git that you can download, but it also comes with that better command console that we are going to use. So what we need to do is download this, download the Git version. Then what we need is the Git large file storage. So as I mentioned in the overview video, we need Git LFS for storing all the big files in our projects. Like these will be all .uasset files, .map files, because they're too big to be stored in normal Git repository. So this will be a separate versioning of them in a large file storage, and only references to them will be in the Git repository. And once we downloaded and installed it, and once installed, we need to configure it by using a command like this. And then also when we create our repository, we need to add special files like Gitignore, Git attributes, but I will go into that once we are configuring things. Let's download this. And then the best client, what I found so far, is Sourcetree. We're going to use this in the series. So there's a Windows version, and it's really powerful and easy to use. So let's download this. You need to agree. And then you can see once we create our repository. Then we can commit, see all the status of the file and all that stuff. So now that we downloaded it, let's install all the software. And after that, we will create our Git repository on Azure DevOps. So let's get started and install Git for Windows. What you can do here is just, okay, here my folder already exists, but just go ahead and use most of the defaults. We don't need all that stuff. Menu folder, use the standard Vim, whatever. So just click next, next. Use the recommended Git from command line, next. Open bundle, open, yeah, whatever. Just select all the defaults basically and install it. And once it's installed, then we can go ahead and install Git LFS. And now we are going to install Git LFS. Here you can really go and click the defaults, install it. That's an easy install. Click setup, finish. And now the last part, let's install Sourcetree app. It's opening in the background all the time. And here, skip this registration. And one important thing, don't use the Mercurial installation. That's a different kind of option, so don't use it. We just need Git. Then here, your desktop name, enter your email address. I'm hiding mine here so that you guys can't see my email address. Click next. And we don't have an SS key. We don't need one now, so don't use this. I just have to they're always opening up on a different monitor. And here we can see we have Sourcetree installed. Close that for now. We will come back to it once we configure our account and clone the repository. So now we need to open up that Git bash for executing a command to install Git LFS. So open up the command line. You can find it in the start menu, typing git bash, then you should be able to open it. And so once it's open, then type in git plank lfs plank install. And this and execute, and this should say git lfs initialized. And now with that, we have everything set up so that we can now create our Git repository and set this up and initialize this. So now it's time to create our repository. Here in Azure DevOps, you can get there under dev.azure.com. You can create your own account. If you have a Microsoft account, you can, I think, just log in and create it, so it's free. You can use it. And then you are greeted with this starting page. Because I have no projects anymore, for this purpose I deleted them. So we have brand new system here. Let's create a project to get started. So we call this Darkstar Chronicles. Give a description like Sci-Fi MMO series, whatever. I'm going to make this public because with this you can then clone your own repository from there. You won't be able to commit and change stuff, but download the newest version so that you can compare your source code to mine and so on. So I'm going to make this public, but I really would love for you to create your own repository, your own project, like I mentioned in the overview video. Create your own stuff. So, and then I would suggest make it private. But for our purposes here, or for my purposes, I'm making this public. And under advanced, you can see Git control, Git and basic. That's what we need. Let's create the project. It might take a while. So now we have our project created. it's not only a Git repository, but it's so much more. You can have boards and a wiki and some other stuff, test plans. Artifacts cost money, so I would not touch them, but repos are free. So under repository, you can see here's your Git repository that you would use for cloning in Visual Studio Code or any other software. We are going to clone it later on in Sourcetree. What you need to do is create some Git credentials. We need that in Sourcetree to access our account, but you need to make sure that you save your password, because that is only displayed once, and then you would need to create new credentials to be able to access your repository. So let's create Git credentials before we do anything else. And it creates a username, password, and it says copy the password now. And now that this is created, what we need to do down here is initialize the main branch with a README or Gitignore. So what we can do is, or let me explain, a Gitignore is a file that defines which files are not committed to the source control, not committed to the repository. So there are a lot of files in our project, like DLL files, like temporary folders, and many more things in our project that it's not good to commit to our repositories. And the good thing here is Azure DevOps already has a Unreal Engine Gitignore that we just need to select. It adds a README file, and let's hit initialize. And now this is how our repository looks like. It's the main branch, and we only have like the Gitignore and the README file in there. So now we created our repository. You can see the commits there, that I'm committed the README and Gitignore to the repository. You can later on, we can create branches and all that stuff. So now we set up our repository, and that means we can clone it to a directory on our hard drive and then create our Unreal project and copy and move it to this directory. So before we go ahead and clone our repository, I want to really stress now that really structure is necessary for our series, our project. So what do I mean? We need like a centralized project folder that we can put our assets in, our Unreal projects in, maybe documentation and so on. And that, let's say we create a lot of assets, need to re-import them. There are some features in Unreal that we can set the directory where we can auto re-import basically data, and even just finding our data more efficiently and easily. So what I'm going to do here now is, this is my D drive, my projects drive, and I'm creating a new folder called projects. And inside that folder, I am creating some other folders like assets. So all the assets that we are creating in Blender, in Photoshop, whatever, we are going to put here. Then we create a new folder called docs or documents for maybe some mind maps, other documents, PowerPoint documents that I create during the progress of the series. I can put in here. And of course, let's say a folder called Unreal. And in here we will create or clone our project, and we will create also our resource projects in there. So just to make this first thing here, create these folders, like find a folder on one of your drive, call it projects or series projects or whatever, and create some projects. You can name them whatever you want, but just to make it really structured. And we will place all our stuff here. So for example, in assets, we can do something like 3D assets and have like 2D assets as well. So we can easily find and structure our project so that it's easier to work with. Okay, so here we are in Sourcetree. When you open up, you can see local repositories and remote. So we are going at remote and we need to create an account. So once we click add an account, this dialog pops up and we need to choose the hosting service. So it's called Azure DevOps. We need the host URL, and when we look at our DevOps account, we can see that it is your name, basically devazure.com and the name. So you would need to put in your name. Let's put this aside. And then the authentication is personal access token. And what we need to do is click this refresh personal access token. And there we need to add the information that you got from creating the Git credentials. So your username would be your email address, and then the password is the one that you kind of like recorded. So I'm adding my email and hiding it, of course. And entering the password. Click OK. And now he's creating a connection and checking the password and the username, and it's authentication OK. So once we click OK, then we have our Azure DevOps account ready. And you can see on the right side that we see our repository we created. So you actually can create more repositories. Like if I'm going here under my project, you can see I have my Darkstar Chronicle projects, and if I want to create another repo, that means another project, I would create new project, the same stuff that we did here. And then when you create this, a new project, then you would see the repository here as well. So we have Darkstar Chronicles now. What we need to do is click on it. We want to clone it. And then we will see a dialog where we want to clone it to. And this is where we use our folder that we created. So we want to put it under projects, Unreal, and create a new folder called Darkstar Chronicles. Select this folder, and now we have the name, we have the directory, we're checking out the main branch, so everything is here. Clone it. You can see he's now cloning it. Now we have our project here. If we open up our project file, you can see here it downloaded the Gitignore and the README file. So this is now really our version controlled folder. And when we've put files in here, then let's say we create a new text file, call it test.txt. And you can see now we added a new file that is not in the system, in the repository. It's unstaged. So we can select basically this file, stage all, and commit it. But once we get into adding files, adding new stuff to the repository, I will explain all that. So we just, can we remove it? Yes. Okay. And it's deleted here, and I closed source control. And so this is basically then how we would work. Let's close this. And you can see the history, basically the author, the commit, when it was committed, and the comment that was put in. And you can see here, this is our Gitignore file that is in the system. And this is how it looks. We will really get into this more when we create our project and move it over. So you can see like the derived data cache, some plugin folders, intermediate folders. All this stuff doesn't need to go into source control. So we have it in our Gitignore. And we will add new stuff later on, because some parts of OWS we don't want in the repository as well. And so we need to add more folders to that later. But this is basically it. Now we have cloned our repository, and the next step will be creating our project and then into a temporary folder, and then moving it to our cloned version controlled folder. So let's start creating our project. In the Epic Launcher, let's click Launch on Unreal Engine 5. And once it's launched, let's create a temporary project first, or let's say we create it not in the final directory on the hard drive. So under Games, click C++, Desktop, Maximum, no starter content. Let's open up, let's say, do it directly in the root of the directory, for example, and we will call it Dogstar Chronicles. So the reason we do this is that first we create the project, configure it a little bit, and then move the files directly into the version controlled folder that we created just a couple of minutes ago. So let's just do this. So under any temporary location, select C++, Desktop, Maximum, and let's create a blank project. Let's create it. It's generating code on the other monitor. So once that's done and the project is created, we can then create a first map and delete some C++ code that was generated. So it's opening, you can see the writer is opening, reading in the solution and everything. Here we have Unreal open. And in this video, we're not really doing much right now. We're just creating our initial project that we can commit. But let's start by creating one folder. We call it Dogstar. So it's one of those, so it's based on Epic guidelines for naming conventions and stuff. When you create your own plugins or your own projects, it's best to use or create a folder that has the same name as your project, but we just use it Dogstar. And so that once we import other stuff, it would be underneath Dogstar or a separate folder. And here we can then start creating our assets and the structure that we are creating for the project in the next videos. But let's just create one folder for now, call it Maps. And then under File, New Level, create an empty level, save current level as, we will call it Login. And the next step would be under Edit, Project Settings. Then under Maps and Modes, we just select here our login for the startup menu and for the default menu in the beginning. That's all we need to do for now. Close Unreal. And now on the C++ side, there's one thing we need to do. Usually now with Writer and stuff, it opens up the select Unreal version and it's generating the project files again, installing the Writer Link plugin, getting everything going, reading in all the header files from the engine. And one thing we can do here is, so we have our, under Games, we have our project, Dogstar Chronicles, which is a module, by the way. And under here, it automatically created that Dogstar Chronicles game mode base that we don't need. So in Writer, you can easily go under Edit, Delete, or hit the Delete key, delete it. It will work. In Visual Studio, what you would need to do is go into your normal Windows Explorer, go into Project, Unreal, whatever, where the file is, the source file is, and delete it by hand. And then you would need to here go and click on under the U project and generate Visual Studio project files again. So it's a lot more steps. When you work with Visual Studio here in Writer, you can just select the files that you want to delete and delete them. So that's all for now that we need. Let's close this. And then before we move it into our version controlled directory, we need to do one thing, and that is to adjust or add some entries into the Gitignore and add the Git attributes for Git LFS. And to highlight what we need to add that is not supposed to be saved into the repository, if you look at our Darkstar Chronicles project under plugins, we have a folder developer and writer link. And this is automatically created by writer, and this is something we don't want to have in our repository. So we would need to add plugins developer into our Gitignore. And so let's do that first. So under projects, Unreal, Darkstar Chronicles, you can see we have our Gitignore and the README file. So let's open up with Notepad, or I'm using Notepad++. And you can see here that this is our Gitignore file with all the files, the directories that we don't need. And what we kind of like need is a folder for plugins developers. And let me just, I did this for the other project. So writer specific files would be like this. And then what usually from idea, that's from the company that creates writer, all files with this, or it's this directory basically, like the Visual Studio files, the directory, we don't need that. And the plugins developer writer link, and star means everything underneath that folder we don't want to import into our repository. So let's save this. And one thing we also need to do, let me put this off again, is Git LFS. So let's open up Sourcetree, and under file status, you can see our Gitignore has changed. And you can see here that we added this specific section. And one thing we need to do is basically add a .git attributes file. And the easiest way to do this on Windows, creating files with dot and no name before, is a little bit tricky. But Sourcetree really offers a tool for our repository to create or to add LFS entries for the Git attributes. So what we can see here is on the repository, Git LFS, we click initialize repository. We say start using Git LFS, and then we have an option to add files. So we only add one for now that the file is created, but then we can add them via hand easily afterwards. So click add, and here you can see all those file types. Let's say we add PSD for Photoshop files. So it's a file extension, yes, track files. And you can see now a Git attributes file was created. And if we look at it here, open it up, you can see it added this entry. And what we need to do is add, I'll have this from the other project, from my development project, and this is basically what we need to do. And one thing that I want to show you is a nice blog entry from a guy that did a nice article about Git LFS and Unreal Engine. I will put that in the description, and here you can read about why Git LFS and so on, how to install it, the install that we did. And here is an entry to the Git attributes file that you can then copy, so you don't need to kind of like look at the video and type everything in. So in this text file, you can see he puts in all UAsset files and UMap files, because these are binary large files that need to be put into LFS and not into the normal Git repository, and stuff like FBX, PNG, audio files, JPEG files, and so on, so that we don't put that in. So this is an interesting article. You can have a look at it and copy the text entries from there. Let's close this. And so I'm just going to take the whole thing here and save it. And so going back into source control, you can see now after it refreshes, You can see that's our Git attributes, our Gitignore with this change. And now it is time for us to move the project from our temporary folder into our version controlled folder. So let's keep this open. Let's go into Windows Explorer. So let's go to our Darkstar Chronicles temporary, or the project that we created, and let's select everything here and move it into our version controlled folder. Now everything is in here. We have our Git attributes, Gitignore. If we change over to our Sourcetree app, then you can see all the files that are now new to be committed to the repository. And these are really not many, like the UMap, you have the ini files, our C#, CPP files. So usually, if you don't know, the most important folders in a Unreal project are the source, we have the config, the content, and plugins. All of the others, they really are temporary folders that are created once we build the project in the binaries and so on. So this is only stuff that basically needs to be committed. And you can see it here. We have in the config, in the content, and the source. So there are not many files. And what we can do now is, so usually how it works is you have on-stage files that are recognized as new or changed. And to be able to push them into our repository, let's say you can either select the ones that you want and stage selected, or we stage all. And now that they are staged, we need to commit them. So it's best advised to create a comment. So we would say initial commit of UE5 project, for example. Hit commit. Now all the changes are committed, but they are not yet pushed. You can see here there's a 1 on the push. So it's committed changes that are right now local to our computer and not the main online repository. And now that we push our changes to our online Azure DevOps repository, let's say push. And so it's pushed to our repository. And if we have a look at our online repository, you can see now we have config, content, source. In source, we have the files. So now that we pushed it to here, all the files are now version controlled on Azure DevOps. So I guess that's it for now for this video. It's been a long video, but it really helped us to get started installing all the necessary software, creating our initial project, and using version control from the start. That's really important. So yeah, I guess now that we've done that, in the next video, we will download OWS, we will register an account there, we will configure it and move all the necessary files to our project. So yeah, step by step, we are getting this project started. So I hope I see you guys in the next one, and take care.